Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to Global Ventures here on Planet Coaster. We are doing lots of rebuilding work today. Basically, this is City of the Future. You remember this. It's been a while actually since the last video. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. But I just felt like this didn't feel much like the way a city would be laid out. So we're going to go for something a little bit different. We're going to move Gambate over slightly. And then we're going to start working. Again, I'm kind of watching this on my preview window, so you'll have to bear with me at just a second as well whilst I try to remember what it is exactly we're doing. Yeah, let's talk about why it's been so long since the last video. I thought I had one queued up for last week. I thought I had one rendered and ready to go. I took my 2 weeks off. It was meant to be a week, but it turned into 2. But we already know about that. If you watch my OpenTTD series, you know about that anyway. But as it turned out, I didn't have a video pre-prepared, so I kicked myself a little bit over that one because it meant that I missed last week, which was rather unfortunate. I must remember to replace that ATM actually because I forgot to do that after I finished this episode. But yeah, so off camera I've done lots of work, I've done lots of research into more aspects of theme parks that we're going to include in future episodes. We do a lot of theming today, we do a lot of building work with regards to scenery, and we completely finish the central plaza area of City of the Future. So that is the entire area around Gambate, also the area around the base of Tower 16. It is currently called Tower 42 on the video, but it will change at the end to 16, which was the original name. And also Crazy Taxi, that pretty much gets finished off as well, bar one or two things. I also do some work on the interior of our restaurant, make sure that it looks a little bit more restaurant-y, including creating some custom benches, which aren't the best looking things in the world, but for a first attempt I'm quite pleased with them. They serve the purpose quite nicely. Now, something I'm going to post a link to in the description. First of all, I'm going to post a link to the episode plan, because that's quite important. I have it for my other series, I also have it for this series. Those of you who've already been on the episode plan, you will have seen the fact that there is a Global Ventures one on there. There is one for City Skylines as well, but I've put, at the moment, that series is dormant. In other words, I'm not making any videos on it. For reasons that I'll explain. Well, for reasons that everyone should know really. The game is very volatile still. It's an awesome game, I just wish that the mods would work all of the time and not just some of the time. It can make it a little bit frustrating. Anyway, that's one thing I'm going to post a link to. The other thing is a names list. There's a really awkward buzzing noise in my ear from these headphones. I have to do get some more headphones really. Hopefully the microphone still works. It seems to be picking up okay. I'm sure someone will tell me if my audio doesn't work properly. A new microphone is on my to-do list though. It is on a to-do list of things to get. I've been rewatching some of my videos in recent days, and the audio is a little bit hit and miss at times. So that is definitely on the to-do list of things to improve. Anyway, by the by. So the other thing I'm going to post a link to is a names list. Now I have a names list on my OpenTTD series where people can suggest names for loads of different things. This is slightly different. This is a Google Docs rather than a Google Sheets. This is names of all the areas that I plan on building in the park, including ones that aren't part of the original roster, which I might actually emphasize between now and me posting the link, but I can always change that once the link goes live anyway. It's what I love about Google Docs, is I can just change things as and when I need to. So that's one of the things, is the names of the areas. The other thing is the names and ride types of all of the rides that I plan on building inside Global Ventures. There are a few of them. Now again, same with the areas. Not all of them are going to make it into the original roster. Some are going to be saved for future expansion and things like that. If you do have suggestions, the best place to put them is the comments. If you think a name looks a bit silly and you have a better suggestion, I'm never going to rule out that necessarily, but do remember that these are names that I have had in my head for about 5 or 6 years now. Some of them are pretty much set in stone. Some of them, there is room for manoeuvre. I think some would be more obvious than others. But I just thought it would be a good idea for you guys to be able to see what it is that I have planned for this park. because it's a huge project. The episodes might not go up that often, mostly because my creative juices don't flow as nicely as I would like them to at times, and that's a really disgusting sentence. What I mean is there are times where I just don't have the creativity. And I watch other series on Planet Coaster, and one of the things that annoyed me, not so much annoyed me, actually more upset me, was I've been watching Koali Beach, which is the collaboration between delay designer Silverette, Rudy, and originally Corrales as well. Corrales has dropped out. What I keep going to say the word annoys me. It doesn't annoy me. It does make me quite sad that this is the case. Sometimes people do get a little too self-conscious about their designs. I used to be like that as well. That's why I feel like I can talk about this, is I used to be like that myself. I used to get really self-conscious. I didn't want to share any of my designs because I knew that some of them just weren't very good. A bit like what you're about to see on screen now as I designed my benches for the interior of the extended restaurant. I'm not that happy with them, but they're placeholders. And I think that's something that people need to realise, especially when it comes to games like Planet Coaster. Sometimes you don't have the creativity that you would want, and it is incredibly frustrating. Sometimes the game doesn't do like you want it to do, which is what's happening on screen right now as I'm trying to duplicate and move these scenery pieces. I do find a way around it in the end, don't worry. It takes a little while, but I do get there. So there are people that will have creative issues. I am one of those people still. As I say, it's one of the reasons why videos aren't uploaded as regularly as perhaps I'd like. Once a week was my absolute limit. Originally I wanted to do 2 a week, one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday. Thankfully I have another series that's currently running on Thursdays, otherwise I'd be a little bit stumped, because there are days where I just do not feel like playing Planet Coaster. Or I don't feel like building anything extensive. I love the game and I really like to play the game. And when I say play the game, I mean sit and watch a roller coaster do laps of a track, especially when it's a good one. Especially Curse of the Fort, that's one that I really like. Was it Curse of the Fort or Raid of the Fort? I can't remember what we stuck with in the end, but I really like that ride. It took me a long time to get there, but the layout is pretty much how I want it to be now, which is good. So that's my advice, actually. I'm not going to give advice to people like Corrales because they really don't need my advice. If anything, I should be listening to their advice because they are so much better at this sort of thing than I am. But the reason I got upset about Corrales leaving that particular series, and with some of his other videos where he's just not been able to find the creative flow, is sometimes you don't have it. Sometimes you're just not on it. But you can still play the game and you can still build something, and that's what I do. That's my coping mechanism for it. There are days where I just can't build anything new. I get it all the time, but I know that I want to build something, so I find something to do. I find, in this case, I started off by placing these benches because I knew that I wanted to redesign the interior of this restaurant, so it felt like a logical thing to do would be make some benches. They're not very good benches. They're certainly not going to be the best thing I've ever built in the game. And believe me, a lot of these buildings, one of the reasons I decided to do this was the interior and exterior of these buildings at the moment are really bland. That is something that will be fixed in future episodes. I have plans to create images to be displayed on billboards on the outside of the buildings. Things like Japanese symbols, adverts, that kind of thing. So it feels like an actual city. I must admit, I've never been to Japan. That's the first thing I should say. My knowledge of sort of backstreet Tokyo kind of buildings is from watching films and TV mostly, and I have to admit, this is really not good research, by the way. I will be doing research between now and actually doing this, but Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. There's a few scenes in that movie where it's kind of like backstreet alleyways in Tokyo. And there are lots of sort of neon signs with writing on. You get that in all cities. But I really want to sort of take that on board and use it in this area. Sort of create the vision of a dystopian, futuristic-like city. I think that's going to work really nicely with the theme. Because normally when you think futuristic, you think everything's bright and shiny and kind of like Mirror's Edge style architecture. But actually, films like Blade Runner are also good inspiration for me with this, because there are times where it's just dark and dingy and horrible. The future isn't always sunshine and roses. Sometimes there are things that you don't want. And I kind of want this area of the park to represent both of those things. I'm going to have to be careful because it is also themed around Japan. So you don't want to create the illusion that Japan is dark and dingy, because I'm pretty sure it isn't. I do know people that have been there. I feel like there's a real sort of trend at the moment around Japan. People learning Japanese or, you know, watching anime, things like that. I'm not an anime fan myself. I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se. It's just not my cup of tea. But it's this kind of fine balance of, I don't want to insult the country, but at the same time I do want to sort of represent both sides of the spectrum, or both ends of the spectrum. So the nice shiny side of it and the dark and dingy side of it as well. There is always both. No matter where you go in life, there is always going to be a mixture of both. So the point I'm really making with creative flow is sometimes you just have to build something, and then that something can spark an idea that will lead you to do something else. So in this particular episode, I had two things on my plan. Theme the Central Plaza and build the queue for Tower 16, which I should change because on my to-do list it says Tower 42 still. I don't know where I got 42 from. Maybe because I looked at the height of the building and assumed it would have 42 floors, but 16 was the name that I had on my original list. So 16 is the name of the ride. And again, the queue for Tower 16 isn't the nicest thing. And in fact, it's kind of like a Tower of Terror style thing. So there's a tower that's got a name. At the moment it's called the M4 Tower, because I'm very vain like that. But things like that I'm actually open to suggestions. There are things like restaurants and rides and things like that that have already been named, but for example, this is a Japanese city. There's no fixed name for the city. I'd like each of my areas to have an overall name, so in this case City of the Future, but I'd also like to have the area within the area have the name. So in this case the city, I'd quite like to have the city have its own separate name, which makes it feel like its own separate entity. Because again, if you can do that, it feels real. A good example of that is Frontierland at Disneyland Paris, especially the town that the area is based on, or based in, is called Thunder Mesa. Or Thunder Mesa, yeah, Spanish. I only said Thunder Mesa, but that doesn't sound right. Thunder Mesa. Let me look up what Mesa means quickly. Table, apparently. I'm sure that there are other meanings. No, it's the Frontierland's fictional town Thunder Mesa. That's what it's called. So apparently Thunder Table is what it's what it translates as. I'm sure there's another one somewhere. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing I want to have here as well. Now if you look on the plans, you will see there are I should put the name of the country next to each one as well. Some of them are quite obvious, like Kingdom of the Dragon. It's a Chinese themed area. Chill of the North doesn't really have a set country. It's kind of a hybrid area. Peak of the Rockies is Canada. City of the World it's still called. That's not right. That was what it was originally called, but now it's called City of the Future. Is Japan. And then you've got other ones like Valley of the Nile is Egypt, Legend of the Frontier is America, things like that. Each one's going to have kind of an area or a town or a village or something like that that would need a name. So I am open to suggestions for names. That's what this whole roundabout thing was all about. I am open to naming suggestions for these areas. So this city, for example, needs an authentic Japanese name. I personally am not really qualified to do that. But if there is anyone out there who would like to suggest some names, keep it tasteful, that's all I ask. I will be vetting suggestions before I choose one, so do be careful. But feel free to suggest some. I would like to get people involved with this as much as I like to get people involved with all of my series. And you can see here I'm messing around with a hybrid street lamp / security camera. I like these scenery pieces. I think sometimes there's too much freedom in where you can place them. Like you can see in a second I placed the street lamp camera hybrid, but I'm trying to get it to line up so that it's perpendicular to the pathway, which is actually incredibly frustrating. Also the fact that benches, they probably are, maybe if you don't stick them to paths, but benches don't count as part of a blueprint. So there, I didn't even notice that it was just a street lamp and a security camera when I saved the blueprint, because I quite like the idea of having street lamps slash security camera, bench, bin, bench, and then start the cycle all over again. But in the end I couldn't get the benches. You can see here I'm going back and trying to re-highlight the benches. This episode, I should have put a little disclaimer at the start. It's not the most exciting episode in the world. There is a lot of trial and error going on at the start here. The second half is a little bit more, I don't want to say action-packed, but there's a lot more placing things that are actually going to stick. And then we do go and theme Tower 16 as well. I do a lot of building work inside Tower 16 so that it feels like a built-up actual skyscraper now, rather than just a facade shell kind of thing. The ride itself is still very much the same. The building, as I say, is very much the same. The doors should still open at the same time as they did in the last episode, or whenever it was that we placed them. Apart from that though, you see here I moved the building a little bit so that the path lines up a lot nicer with the entrance. And then we go inside and we start building on the interior of this ride. Now the tower itself is actually a lot taller. It's taller than I thought, but not as tall as I want it to be, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So it doesn't go right the way up to the roof of the building. So I do build a faux roof on top of the ride. In fact, I build it underneath the height of the red light at the top, because I don't really want that red light. That red light is an aviation thing. You probably know one of the many facts about Disney World in Florida is that the castle in the center of the Magic Kingdom is built at a specific height, because if it was built any higher they'd have had to have put an aviation beacon on top. That's what the red light is on top of this tower. It's an aviation beacon. We don't need one. It's inside a building. The actual building itself will probably end up having one for realism's sake, but the ride doesn't need one because it's inside. So I'm not actually sure if the roof that I've put over the top will hide the light, or the fact that the ride passes through the ceiling means that the light will still shine through as well. But it's my attempts at hiding it. The inside of the building here is very, very bland and very, very basic. The idea being that it's dark, so you're not supposed to be able to see what you're looking at. You literally walk through the entrance of the ride, which is going to be at the back. You get into I need to say car. You get into the gondola, and then you rise up to the top. The doors open, you realise how high up you are, and then you drop. That's the ride. There's no Tower of Terror type storyline or anything like that, really. It's just you get in an elevator, you go up to the top of the building. Basically, it's meant to be you go up to the 16th floor, but I have a strong suspicion that this ride is a lot taller than the 16 stories. But you go up to a certain height within the building, and then you hear a cable snap, which I might put a little speaker at the top with a sound of something snapping, and then you drop to the ground again. That's the ride. I would like to invest in my storylines to the extent that Disney do, and I will do with a lot of my sort of e-ticket style attractions, but ones like this, I have no personal interest in drop towers. I just knew that I wanted one in the park, so I'll theme it and I'll give it a basic storyline, but I won't spend too much time on it. My roller coasters, however, with Crazy Taxi, in fact the two existing rides in the park, Crazy Taxi and Fort, they're kind of exceptions to the rule. Crazy Taxi is literally a Wild Mouse coaster. There's nothing you can really in fact, I've listed it on my list here as being kind of a hybrid. Where did I put it? There it is. Wild Mouse El Loco, I've called it, because it is a Wild Mouse style, but it has the Beyond Vertical Drop and the inversions, and it is technically an El Loco style coaster anyway. So that's kind of a hybrid itself. S&S are now starting to build Wild Mouse El Loco coasters by the looks of things, or at least they are in Global Ventures. That doesn't need a storyline as such. The only real storyline is the taxis in the city have suddenly developed a mind of their own. Very similar to the storyline of the original Big Thunder Mountain, actually. Although I think Big Thunder was a cursed mine, has made the trains go by themselves. This is kind of self-driving cars have gone out of control and turned into crazy taxis, and then you get on one and you go on this wild ride in and out of buildings. Kind of ruins the illusion for me slightly. The original plans that I had for Crazy Taxi were to use an extended coaster on RCT3 and have it very much. It has a big tower and it has a big first drop, but the majority of the ride is very close to the ground, as if you are playing Crazy Taxi. If anyone's played the game, you do drive around, I think it's San Francisco, because there's cable cars and stuff, or it's an amalgamation of lots of different cities. But you get lots of airtime, but you spend a lot of time on the ground driving, and I kind of wanted the ride to be a representation of that, which it can still be. But the way that if that storyline works with the self-driving car gone wrong, then yeah, you know, it can go airborne. This is the future after all, anything can happen. But you've seen me build Crazy Taxi. I want to talk a bit more about Tower 16, because you can see here I'm building the queue, and at this point I know that I want the queue to be enclosed, and I want the enclosure to be part of the ride building. I think I go through two different proper versions of the queue, plus a priority. My big rides like this, I consider this still, it's not an e-ticket as far as I'm concerned, but I know that it's a big ride in terms of a roster, so it will always have a priority. Even the railroad has a priority, because I know that if someone wants to get from the front of the park to the back of the park, pathfinding wise, that might still be the quickest way, so lots of people will end up taking that as their chosen route. Apart from that, there are going to be lots of rides that don't have priority. Gambatene is a good example of that. Crazy Taxi also has priority because it's a coaster. All of my coasters will also have priority. But you can see what I mean by bland building. It's not meant to look good, because you're not really supposed to see it. I'm going to put bushes and trees outside the front of it, and it is going to be kind of like with the Haunted Mansion. You will notice I use a lot of Disney examples. I've never been to the Disney parks in America. I really would like to go at some point in the future, but I know enough about them, and I know enough about the architecture and the building style and all of that, that I can base my park off of those ideas, as crazy as that might sound. But a bit like the Haunted Mansion, where you sort of meander around the front of the building and then you go into the main front door. This is kind of the same, except you go in around the back. So the queue itself originally starts off down the left hand side of the building, and then you go into part of the tower, which is very bland still at present. You can see I'm putting some railings in here, but I do jazz it up a little bit. I feel like making the lobby in this section as well, like Tower of Terror style lobby, so a building that's sort of been abandoned almost. That definitely sort of, it's the idea that I would like to pursue. But for that I do need some decoration, which means I might start browsing the workshop as well and using workshop parts. Obviously I'll credit the right people, because it'll be pretty obvious that I wouldn't have built them myself. You can see here I'm sort of building like a queue extender, so the whole queue isn't used as such at this moment in time, but if the ride becomes really popular, I've got that little extra section that I can use for the queue. It's always nice to have that in your locker just in case. It's one thing I've noticed on a lot of videos that I've watched, is people do build the overflow queues even if they are never used. It's still there because in real life they are there. Air at Alton Towers, which is now Galactica. When I rode it, it was Air. First time I rode it, I was just straight on pretty much, which was quite fun actually, just being able to walk onto a ride. It's one of the things I miss about going to theme parks on busy summer days where you expect it to, or hot summer days where you expect it to be really busy, and actually it ends up being almost empty. But first time I rode Air, as it was, I walked on the ride. The second time I was in the overflow queue, which I didn't even know existed until I ended up in it. But that was an experience, certainly one that I wouldn't want to repeat. Very long queue, very hot day. But overflow queue. That's the main point. They exist, so I might as well have them in the park here as well for realism's sake. You can see here I'm putting some lights in. I didn't want them to queue in darkness, even if the ride itself is in darkness. I'm tempted to put some kind of door across where the queue turns into the entrance to the ride itself. So when you actually walk through and you board the gondola, I'm tempted to put some kind of doorway across there. And you can see here I'm just trying to find some kind of sign to go on this back wall. Like I said, I want to dress this up as either a lobby or some kind of foyer type area for the building, because it is quite a big building, and this is sort of the back end of the building. You can see here I just copy the sign that we have out the front. Do change the text. At this point I hesitate for a second because I can't think of a name for the building, so I'm just going to call it the M4 building. And then I change the name at the front of the ride here as well, and then I change the name of the ride inside. So Tower 16 is pretty much ready to go. It's not fully themed, as I said. That will happen. Over time we will always come back to these areas. We're almost ready to move on. In fact, next episode we are moving on to a new area, because I don't want to stay working on one area for too long. So next episode 15, 16, 17 and 18. So the next 4 episodes we're going to be working on a new area, which I'll reveal a little bit more about at the end of this episode. And then 19 onwards we're going to be working on an area again after that. Doesn't mean that these areas are finished. City of the Future is nowhere near finished. We still got the dark ride that we have to build, although I'm waiting for an update with the right sort of ride type for the dark ride, because I would quite like a robo coaster if one was to exist in a future update. So I'm holding out on that one. I might just build an empty building there as a facade, as a placeholder. A bit like what Disney do with some of their parks. If a ride isn't built yet, they will put something in the place as a placeholder, so it's not just an empty plot. A good example of that, let me think of a good example of that. Well, one good example I suppose is Animal Kingdom. What is now the Pandora area did have another area as a placeholder for actually what was supposed to be a different area, but ended up never getting built. But it's that kind of thing. You don't want an empty plot, because there's nothing worse in a theme park than just empty land. You'll always want something built within that area. So I will build something on the site of the factory tour, which I still need to remember the name for. I need to go back and rewatch that old episode of RCT3 and remind myself what the ride is supposed to be called. But we got that to build. I would like to build a go-kart track in this area in the future as well, plus loads of sort of side alleys, side streets, that kind of thing. I feel like if I was to build a motion simulator somewhere in the park, if that ever got released into the game, it would be in this area as well, kind of like a Star Tours type ride, although it would be themed to something else, of course, because Star Wars is already taken. I'm not against putting sort of franchise type rides into my parks, as long as I don't get in trouble license wise or copyright strikes on YouTube. I don't mind doing that. But you can see here that the theming for Gambas Aine, technically there isn't any. The discus itself is just a ride. There's no real backstory behind it or anything like that. Gambas Aine translates as good luck in English, or at least it did when I looked it up. I hope that's still the case. Otherwise that's going to be a bit awkward. But this is the central plaza of the city, whatever the city happens to be called. It's not really in the center, it's more towards the edge, considering the main path that links it up to the central area of the park actually comes off at the edge of this plaza. But it's a city park essentially, so there's a lot of green. So the discus ride itself, it sits right in the middle of the green area, but there's going to be loads of trees, bushes, flowers, rocks, all that kind of thing. And in fact this is the part here where I just go mental with loads of trees and bushes and rocks and flowers and all that kind of thing. Obviously checking clearance, you'll see me check some clearance in a second when I place some trees. Gambas Aine swings diagonally across the plaza so that you can still see from one side to the other from a certain height, but it is diagonally across it rather than just straight across it, because I feel like if you do it diagonally it gives a little bit more interest, visual interest, whereas if you just do it straight across the plaza, it's kind of obvious that you're going to do it that way. There are small bushes and trees here as well because of how close it is to the path. But apart from that, we've got some pretty big trees here. We've done a good job of hiding the structure of the ride. The actual gondola and the disc itself does swing above the tree line, but you would expect that. It does give you good views. One thing I do like with theme parks, not every theme park does this. Some did, and then they build things that sort of get in the way, but sight lines. If you ever go in London and you look at buildings like the cheese grater and the walkie-talkie and even the Shard, you'll notice that it's almost like they're leaning out the way, and they are. The cheese grater is a very good example. There's loads of sight lines in London, in and around St Paul's Cathedral. There are some other buildings that are noted, but the one that really stands out is St Paul's Cathedral. So no building from certain angles is allowed to be taller than St Paul's Cathedral, the dome at the top, and they're also not allowed to go above the height of the dome even if they're built behind, which is why the Shard really goes into a point at the top. It looks nice, first of all, although I always think the Shard looks a little bit too like a shard of glass for my liking. It almost looks a little too blocky, if that makes sense. But the reason it is built in that shape is because it just about ducks out the way of the sight lines before it reaches the point. And I mean, if you go to Richmond Park, there's a whole avenue of trees where you can just see down the middle, and if you look really hard enough on a good day, you can see St Paul's at the end of that line of trees. That's why they've been put like that. And that's kind of what I feel like doing with this park as well, having sight lines, so being able to stand at one side of the park and be able to see right the way across to the other. Yes, it ruins the immersion a little bit because you're going to be standing in a futuristic Japanese themed area and you look across the way and you'll be able to see for an example, a Kenyan themed area, if that does get built. I'm not actually sure if that's going to make the final roster or not, but if it does, it will be built opposite City of the Future, the opposite side of the lake. So that would be what you'd be able to see. So there's a little bit of an immersion loss there, but at the same time, it's a theme park. You know, going on the big wheel at Chessington, Peking Heights I believe it's called, I think it's still there. I haven't been to Chessington in 4 years. I haven't been to any theme park in 4 years, so I need to get out there again, really. I need to go on some roller coasters. But I used to love going on Peking Heights and just looking out across the park. I know they had the whole thing of you can see London and things like that, but I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in the park. So you go on Peking Heights and you can see right the way across to Vampire and Rattlesnake and rides like that. And I want that to be in this park as well. I want to be able to stand on one side of the park and be able to see right the way across to the other. I think that's going to be really, really cool, getting those sight lines in. We are approaching the end of this episode. I'm going to get my timings wrong again, I'm sure, so you might see the footage start to slow down a little bit where I've had to extend it to match my voice, but I always do that, sometimes more subtly than others. Where am I going with this? Well, yes, next episode. Next episode originally was going to be working on Heart of the Forest, which is our old English themed area. However, I had a real spark of creativity from building this section of the park and having a look at Crazy Taxi, and I want to build the Frontier section next because I have a really, really good idea for a finale for a roller coaster, which is going to be built in that area. So I want to get that down in the game as fast as is humanly possible, and hopefully you guys like the idea as well. So we're going to save that for next time. We are going to be working on Legend of the Frontier, and I will explain a little bit more about that as and when I get around to recording the next episode. But until then, guys, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and of course if you're enjoying the series. Drop some comments down below with ideas for future episodes, and be sure to go over and check out the episode plan and also the ride name list as well, so you can see what's coming up in the future. Apart from that, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support, and until next time, I will see you soon.